in life, which we've been exploring with different voices and from various angles. And the bit of it that I wanted to explore this evening is to do with the deathless. And so this is a bit of a trial run, because as it so neatly happens, the weekend retreat that at least I hope some of you are going to be on is also about the deathless, about opening the doors to the deathless. So when I was asked to come up with a theme for the retreat many months ago, I just basically picked something, the nearest thing off the top of my head, which was open other doors to the deathless. But it seems to work out quite well. Oh, I've got to do that. Got it. Oh, I'm going to move it around. Yes. Yes. So the context for this is, well, it comes up a lot in the Pali Canon, the idea of the deathless, but the context for this exploration is the Buddha's proclamation after he has become awakened and seen the complexity of what it is that he has understood and the difficulty associated with teaching it, communicating it. He errs on the side, perhaps momentarily, or he has a momentary wobble about whether it is ever going to be possible for him to teach it, because it's so sublime, it's so refined, it's so beyond the scope of normal human beings to understand. But if you remember Brahma Sahampati, who is like the sort of chief of the gods, who's a pretty important personage in the Deva world, appears to the Buddha and beseeches him to teach. So he says, you know, do teach. There are beings which have but little dust on their eyes who will understand your teachings. And so the Buddha says, oh, right then. So he overcomes that sort of, it's interesting to want to sort of think about what it might have been, like a kind of momentary wobble in the Buddha's confidence. But he overcomes it. And he says this from this is taken from the Ayachana Sutta, which is I can't remember the name, the English, but oh yeah, the Sutta of the request, of Brahma Sahampati's request. And he says, open are the doors to the deathless. To those with ears, let them show their conviction. Perceiving trouble, O Brahma, I did not tell people the refined, sublime Dharma. So there's a little bit of kind of slight bit of self-reproach in there, almost one could read into that. So he's been persuaded to teach the Dharma, and he's talking about the deathless. And so I should, full disclosure at this point, about an hour ago, I jettisoned half of my talk. A lot of the talk that I jettisoned was basically about what the opposite of the deathless is. So, you know, the death falls, and I was going to go into some detail into how living in samsara, living in the wheel of life, is in many ways a bit more like being dead than being alive. But I thought that might just sort of dampen the mood on a sunny Wednesday evening. So, and you know how it is sometimes when you just can't quite make something fit? And I couldn't quite make it fit. And then I thought, I've got to do that. I've got to drop all of that. And I felt, good. There's a relief. And then, and then I'm going to have to think of some other things to fill with time. But basically, I've kept half of it. So what I'm proposing to do is to look at a specific extract from a sutta, which is called the Jnana Sutta, in which the Buddha talks about the deathless in quite unusual and interesting terms, and how you can aspire to move towards it and its particular qualities. Perhaps I should just say that the deathless is kind of a synonym for, it's a synonym for awakening. Yeah. The deathless is a synonym for enlightenment, for awakening. You could perhaps equally have called it the birthless, because what the Buddha is talking about, the deathlessness that he is talking about, is sort of stepping off the wheel of life altogether. So, you know, the Buddha was wrestling with the problem of death before he went on his quest to become awakened. And he must have really realized over time that the only way to avoid dying was not to be born. Yeah. So the only way to get around the problem of the deathless, of birth and death, was to step off the wheel of life altogether, which is synonymous with attaining enlightenment. So it's just it's a synonym for enlightenment, but it has a particular flavor to it. Yeah. So, Lee, could you share? I made it really big because I was going to print it, and now, of course, it won't fit on the screen. But there we go. So this is an extract from the Jhana Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, so from the Pali Canon. And I'm just going to read it, and then I thought we could just look at it, and we could turn it into a bit of a study session, and it could be quite interactive, as there aren't that many of us, and that would help me out. Yeah. So anyway, the Buddha says, there is the case where a monk enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born of withdrawal, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. He regards whatever phenomena there are that are connected with form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness as inconstant, stressful, a disease, a cancer, an arrow, painful, an affliction, alien, a disintegration, an emptiness, not self. He turns his mind away from those phenomena, and having done so, inclines his mind to the property of the deathlessness. This is peace. This is exquisite. The resolution of all fabrications, the relinquishment of all acquisitions, the ending of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. I'm just going to read that again. Yes. This is peace. Not the whole thing. The whole thing. Just
is that right?
Yeah, sure. There is the case where a monk enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born of withdrawal, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. He regards whatever phenomena there are that are connected with form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness as inconstant, stressful, a disease, a cancer, an arrow, painful, an affliction, alien, a disintegration, an emptiness, not self. He turns his mind away from those phenomena, and having done so, inclines his mind to the property of the deathless. No, it probably should be deathless, actually. This is peace. This is exquisite. The resolution of all fabrications, the relinquishment of all acquisitions, the ending of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. Okay, there's actually quite a lot of familiar stuff in that to many of us, even though maybe some of the ways, the spellings and some of the terms are a little unusual. So he's talking about the basis for approaching the deathless here. And the basis for approaching and entering the deathless is to get into jhana. Okay, so jhana is, I think it's familiar to most of us. Maybe not. Okay, good. Well, that's good. That's fine. We can pick that apart. So jhana is, I think it's the word from which the word Zen arose. So the word Zen, and that whole tradition is a corruption of the word jhana. And it's what the dhyanas are a series of what you might call superconscious states of absorption. Okay, so we have our normal consciousness, don't we? The consciousness that I'm inhabiting right now, and maybe you're inhabiting right now, but I can't speak for you, but I can speak for me. So the consciousness that I'm inhabiting right now is a bit sort of prone to distraction. Yeah, it's a bit, my awareness sort of comes and goes. Yeah, things happen and they take me away from being fully present in the moment. Yeah, and that's kind of like the normal sort of my normal mode of consciousness for much of the time. So sometimes I'm aware, I'll be aware of what I'm doing and what I'm thinking and feeling, and then I'll start worrying about something, and then my mind will be taken away, and then I won't be present anymore. I'll be sort of distracted in something, yeah, and my mind won't be focused. So a lot of our kind of habitual modes of consciousness, and they're kind of, yeah, they're sort of like characterized by a lack of focus. Because our minds, we've all had that experience of sitting down to meditate, and your mind just goes off and does its own thing, doesn't it? Yeah. You sit down and then suddenly you start thinking about something, and your mind just grabs hold of a train of thought that is drawn away from you. And before you know it, you've just spent half an hour thinking about stuff or just daydreaming. Yeah. And we go through life like that in many ways. We go through life kind of like in the future, in the past. I think as Badra Priya put it the other week, we incline towards the future, or we lean into the future events, or we lean into memory. So we're either leaning forwards, looking for the next thing, or we're leaning back, remembering stuff. And some of us are inveterate planners, so our minds are always in the future, kind of planning stuff and sorting things out, or we might be lost in recollection of the past. And so the jhanas are super conscious states of absorption in which our minds come to focus. In which they come to a point of focus and stillness and presence and recollection. Yeah. So, and what the Buddha is describing here are the dhyana factors. So there are 4 of them, the jhanas. There are 4 jhanas, and the first one is the only one we really need to worry about, because the other 3, they get progressively more refined and subtle, and we don't. The good news is you don't actually need them to be able to approach the deathless. So that's good, isn't it? Yeah. So the first jhana has got these 5. There are 5 qualities. The first 2 of which are sort of qualities of thought. So when we're in this very absorbed state, we're still capable of thinking, of cognition. We can turn our minds to an object and kind of turn it over in our minds and reflect on it. So we could be very, very concentrated and reflect undistractedly about impermanence or something else that we wanted to think about. So you can direct your mind to things as you want. So your mind becomes wieldy, yeah, which is a nice place to be, because I know that my mind can often be very unwieldy. It goes where it wants. But in the first jhana, you can put your mind where you want it to go and think about stuff, right? So reflecting on impermanence being an example, and it's very pleasurable. So there are 2 other elements of the first jhana which are more kind of they're sort of emotional and sort of physical in nature. So one of the qualities of being very absorbed is this sort of physical delight. Yeah, sort of physical rapture, the pleasure of being absorbed. Yeah, I don't know if any of you have had that situation where you're getting very absorbed in your meditation. It may happen sometimes, and sort of things happen in your body, like jolts of pleasure, pleasurable energy goes through your body, or you feel your energy rising, or you might even have little shivers. Yeah, is that something that anyone has any? Yeah, okay, but it doesn't always have to happen. Yeah, it's not essential. But, being in jhana is kind of physically and emotionally pleasurable. So you're absorbed. Your body is having this sort of pleasurable stuff going on. And there's a sort of just a feeling of happiness that goes with it. Yeah, it's just feeling sort of there, and your mind is steady, and you're physically sort of enjoying it, and you're happy. And your concentration is sort of unwavering and kind of one-pointed. Yeah, so it's characterized by one-pointedness. Yeah. So that's what the first jhana is like. We think of it as being like something really quite beyond us often. Yeah, I think even quite seasoned meditators can go for years thinking, oh, jhana, it's not for me. I've never experienced it. But I think, and the people I know and trust back this up, that we can experience jhana in different places and not just in meditation. So we can become focused, and we can become still, and we can turn our mind to things, and we can have feelings of happiness and pleasure when we're doing something skillful that we love. Yeah? So that would very much depend on you as a person. Yeah? So it might be, say in John's case, for example, it would be probably in nature, in woodland. So immersed in something that you love doing, which is skillful, and I'm sure that can be jhanic. You can feel very, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm sure it can be very, you can be very clear, very present, very collected, yeah, and stuff like that. Is that your experience? Okay. And for other people, it might be meditation. I'm not going to rule it out, or it might be study. Yeah, some people can really get sort of into study, or it might be reading something really kind of well written, or it might be listening to music, or you know, absorbing art. Yeah. So we can experience these very sort of positive states from any number of different contexts. So it doesn't just have to be meditation. So if you're not really a natural meditator, don't worry. Yeah, just find things that you love doing that are skillful and be absorbed in them. And I think dhyana is more accessible than we often think it is. So once we're in dhyana, so we've arrived in dhyana, right? Okay, so what we're told to do in this sutta is to look at phenomena connected with 5 things. Yeah. So those 5 things may well be familiar, at least to some of us. Yeah, the 5 things that we are looking at. So they are form, feeling, perception, fabrications, which is an unusual translation, and consciousness. Come on, from the floor, what are those 5 things? They're the skandhas, right? So the skandhas are the totality of our psychophysical organism. They're everything that makes us up. Yeah, so our physical organism and our mental organism, our emotional being, those things, those are the skandhas. And not just internally, but the skandhas make up everything in the universe. So everything that arises in the conditioned universe is included in those 5 categories. Yeah, so form, physical form, feelings that arise in the body that are pleasant, painful, or neutral. Our perceptions, so the way that we organize and make sense of the world through kind of classifying and categorizing. The fabrications, which are often translated as volitional emotions, so volitions, so sort of actions which are conditioned by a particular volitional drive, usually craving or aversion and delusion. And consciousness, which is the sort of thing that binds it all together, so our different faculties of consciousness. So that basically the skandhas are everything that we can experience, everything in us and everything in the universe, right? Are you with me so far? Okay. So then the Buddha is saying, but then you have to regard all of these phenomena as all of these horrible things, right? Well, not, inconstant and stressful. I think this stressful is probably what other commentators render as suffering, as dukkha. But anyway, a disease, a cancer, an arrow, etc. And they are empty and they are not self. So basically the Buddha is telling us to, from the sort of basis of dhyana, to kind of turn our attention to all of the things that constitute us and the world, and to see that they're not real, they're empty, and they are actually a cause of suffering. Yeah. So a disease, a cancer, an arrow, painful, etc. So it's sort of pretty strong stuff, really. It's pretty strong stuff that we're being asked to do. And why are we being asked to do that? Well, we're being asked to do that as a sort of antidote to what we normally do, the way we normally respond to everything in the world, which is either I want that or I don't want that. So either craving or aversion. So, but our responses to the things, to the phenomena, the objects in the world and in our experience causes pain. Yeah, because I will respond to something that appears in my consciousness that is pleasant, that I like the look of, with craving. Yeah, like that might be a person, it might be a thing, it might be a new car, or the perfect holiday, or food, or sex. Yeah, I will respond to that with, I want that, or whatever your particular preference is, and we will crave it. Yeah, and anything that we don't like the look of, that appears in our field of consciousness, we will push away. unpleasant people we don't want to be with, situations we don't want to be in. So it's a constant push and pull, isn't there? It's like trying to keep unpleasantness at bay while keeping everything nice and lovely and wholesome in ourselves, and so that we can shore ourselves up with it. And the result is it's stressful, it's dukkha, yeah, apart from anything else, because it might work if the things that we craved and had aversion to would actually do what we wanted them to do. Yeah. So if the thing I crave would actually really satisfy all of my desires forever, then that would be just dandy. And if the thing that I wanted out of my life, if I could just destroy it and get rid of it and all of the other things that I want in my life, then that would be fine and dandy too. But, you know, life has a habit of not obliging us, unfortunately. So our objects of craving don't do it for us. Yeah? You have the thing that you've been craving, and you realize that so much of the pleasure is actually bound up in the craving itself, and the anticipation that once you have the thing, it's a bit of a letdown, or it can be. Or there's a certain shelf life of your satisfaction with that thing, you know, after a few minutes or a few hours or a few weeks. Oh, it's a bit boring, really. I want something out of that thing instead, right? So engaging with the skandhas, engaging with objects out there in the world, engaging with the universe in that way, it leads us to suffer. And the Buddha is saying, well, they're not permanent. They are dukkha. They are not self. Yeah, there is nothing substantial about them. Yeah, so don't waste your time, you could say. Okay. So this is what we're doing. This is what we're being asked to do in, you know, in this sort of state of jhana. And that's a big ask. I do realize that's a big ask, but it is, you know, these are things that we can turn our awareness to, you know, when we remember, you know, things are always, the universe is always trying to teach us, you know, impermanence is always there in our experience trying to teach us. And all we have to do is kind of attend to it. I say all we have to do, we have to remember to attend to it. We have to remember to be attentive to what the world is trying to tell us. So he turns his mind away from those phenomena. So what I don't think the Buddha is saying is that we have to completely sort of not engage with the world. We not engage with the skandhas, because that would make life very difficult. You know, you can't spend your whole life in meditation, you know, completely withdrawn from the world. You have to catch buses and work and cook and eat and, you know, wash up and do all of the things that we have to do. But what I think he is telling us here is that we have to try and learn to sort of approach the five skandhas and approach objects in the world without that clinging, which makes them painful. So when the Buddha talks about the five skandhas in the Pali, he often talks about the five skandhas which are subject to clinging. Yeah. So the Buddha had skandhas too. The Buddha had a psychophysical organism, and he had a relationship with objects in the world, but he didn't cling to them, and he didn't crave them, and he wasn't pushing anything away. So there was no dukkha involved in that experience. So now we can incline our minds to the property of the deathless. This is peace. This is exquisite. The resolution of all fabrications, the relinquishment of all acquisitions, the ending of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. So it's a sort of path. Yeah, there's a sort of sequence here. So it's another kind of version of the spiral path, if you like, that leads us from where we are now to where we want to be. And I'm going to just, for a moment, I'm just going to talk about a walk I went on a few days ago, because I've been reflecting on the spirit material, and I think it has sort of influenced my experience on that walk. And the walk kind of illustrates a little bit what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to just talk about that. So I was out for a walk with the dog, sort of round about late evening, and we live on the river, basically, well, some way above it, but close to the river, overlooking the showground. So if you know that part of town. So there's the Severn Way runs along the river, and it runs over some fields, past opposite the showground, and then up towards Shelton, up towards, yeah. And it's a lovely little stretch of the river. It's sort of kind of unspoiled. And you could imagine, you know, Darwin, who lived there, you know, walking up and down there, and it being very much like it is now. And the first thing I was struck by was this sort of particular the particular extraordinary beauty of the trees. So on the other side of the river, so on the showground side, there's this extraordinary kind of lush growth of various trees with different colours, you know, offset each other beautifully. I don't know much about trees, so I can't say what they are, but I was really sort of struck by it. And as I was sort of watching these trees and in the kind of fading evening light, it was an extraordinary sense of peace descending, and it really did sort of feel exquisite. Exquisite's not too strong a word for it. Just, and then there was the light playing on the river, so the ripples of light playing on the river, and all of the grass was sort of waving, you know, in the light breeze, and everything sort of came to life, right? Everything came to life. And I think this kind of tune, this kind of like relates a bit to this sequence here. I'm not making any claims, I didn't become enlightened, but I think it was one of those glimpses, or one of those occasions where I could sort of see a glimpse of what the Buddha was getting at with these qualities here. And I will say what they are, what they're about, so don't worry. Yeah, so this sort of, everything kind of resolved itself into stillness and beauty because I didn't need anything from it. Yeah, there was, normally when I go through life, there's this sort of sense there's me and what I want, and there are things out there which are kind of more or less useful to me. Yeah, and sometimes, you know, a walk could be useful. You know, you get a bit of exercise, you get the dog out of the house, and there are trees and grass and all that sort of stuff. But very often I have a much more utilitarian attitude to many of the things I do, right? And I imagine this rings a bell. But this was different because there was no purpose. There was nothing I wanted from it. You know, I was just happy just to kind of be there and look at these trees and look at the grass, and that was kind of accompanied by a sort of, you know, a fading of self-preoccupation. Yeah, as we go through life self-preoccupied, it's about us, isn't it? It's about we're at the center of the universe, and we go through life kind of just getting what we want and pushing away what we don't want. So there's a general kind of focus on the self, isn't there? And that kind of just was attenuated. It's sort of, you know, to a degree that wasn't there anymore. I could just sort of just absorb and just be in whatever was happening. I felt like I didn't need to sort of make it mine in a certain kind of way. And again, I think that's something we probably do, isn't it? You know, quite a bit, is to sort of try and make everything mine. We turn things to our advantage. We try to appropriate them. You know, you see a sunset, take a photo. So we can sort of appropriate the sunset and make it part of us. Yeah. So mind maker, but not in a good way. As in, those of you who know the five no monarchy will know that one. Yeah, so I was just happy. I had no particular desire to sort of do anything. I didn't feel like the situation, I didn't need the situation to provide anything. It was just still, it felt like, you know, could just relax into it, just let go and just be there and be present. And I thought about that experience in relation to these qualities, and I thought there's a few correspondences there. Okay, so let's look at them. So start with the resolution of fabrications. That's an interesting one. So fabrications is basically stuff that is made up or put together. Okay, and it's a translation of it's a translation of the word samskara or sankara, which is more usually translated as volitions. But I looked this up in Buddhaghosa, who wrote this massive tome about all this with lots of lists in it. There are 50 different sort of forms. There are 50 different forms of fabrication. One of them is delusion. Yeah? So what we do, what we fabricate is basically we make a bunch of stuff up about the world and our experience that isn't true. Yeah? We fabricate the world. Right? When we fabricate the world by taking basic information and turning it into things that are fixed and separate entities that have like permanence and stability and solidity. Yeah? So we take the world, we take reality and we chop it up into things. We put things into boxes. So we fabricate a world which isn't actually like that. Yeah? So there's me, you know, and I'm a fixed sort of separate kind of continuous, somehow permanent person, you know, in the midst of all these objects and all of you lovely people, all in your, you know, who are all kind of separate, fixed and permanent entities as well, who I have a particular relationship with. Usually it's a positive one. Usually I want to, you know, I don't want to have you to bring you close because you're all nice people and I like you. So maybe there's an element of craving that arises there. But other people I might want to push away because I don't like them. Yeah. So we divide the world up into things that we like and things that we don't like, things that we crave and things that we want to push away, or things that we don't care about at all, which is probably 99% of stuff. Yeah? So we fabricate, we create this situation of me and everything else. We make dualities, we create dualities. And that is what I think he's getting at here. And when I was on my walk, to some extent, it felt as if I didn't need to do that. Yeah. So that's taking in internal experience in my being, like the arising of feelings and emotions in response to it, and taking in information from the world. So, I don't know, the sights and the sound of birdsong, and the sand martins flitting and catching the sun, blazing with their white bellies. And I didn't sort of feel I had to kind of chop them into things and make them all separate. Yeah, it just all felt like it was experience happening in this big, big framework. Yeah, and so that's what we do. That's what fabricating is. I think that's what we do. Yeah, we create all of these things, and we have a relationship with them, and we suffer because they can't give us what we want. And then there's the relinquishment of all acquisitions. That's interesting because that could literally mean we just get rid of all our stuff, you know. But I think it means more than that. I think acquisitions, it's about our tendency to try and make everything about me. You see what I mean? It's a bit like, it's not just having possessions and buying stuff and making it part of us, though that's part of it. It's about our tendency to appropriate the world, to make it all about me. Right, so all of the things that I like and all the things that I don't like. So we are the center of the universe, and everything else out there in the world is to some extent, you know, it's about me, isn't it? About my needs and my interests. Yeah. So I think that's like the broader sense of what acquisitions can mean in this context. Right. So again, I didn't feel like I needed to do that. I didn't feel as though I needed at that moment to kind of, for it all to be about me. It wasn't me experiencing all this stuff and kind of thinking, oh, isn't it wonderful, and making it part of me. It was just experience of things happening. And if we let go of this sort of tendency to fabricate, to sort of chop the world up into things that we have a relationship to, we let go of that sort of self-centered, self-preoccupation, desire to make everything about me, then we will stop craving. So then you get to the ending of craving. Yeah? So if there's no chopping up of things into subject and object, if there's no duality, then there's no self, then there is no one to crave and nothing to crave, if you see what I mean. again, I'm talking very high level. This isn't by any means my normal experience, but it's just at that point, there was a little kind of glimpse. Oh, I don't have anything invested here. I can just let go of the craving. Yeah. And then dispassion is that sort of, it's a bit like, yeah, it's a bit like sort of letting go of a certain entangled involvement with the world. Yeah. So when we're the opposite, well, it's not, I don't suppose it's passion, the opposite of dispassion, but it's that sense of, you know, normally we're kind of entangled in the world and its doings and its games and its, you know, everything it has to offer us. You know, we're kind of, yeah, we're all kind of enmeshed in it, embedded in the world, in all of the sort of its games and its, you know, all of the things that it offers us. Yeah, all of the kind of temptations and allure of the world. You know, we can be very kind of wrapped up in that, very tangled up. And dispassion is the opposite of that. Dispassion is being able to kind of put all that down. You know, you've ceased, if you've got your craving under control, you can just sort of enjoy things. Yeah, you don't have to be tangled up in the world. You don't have to be tangled up in the business of the world. You can move through the world and be involved in it. You can be in it, but not necessarily of it. Yeah, as I sometimes like to think. I sometimes like to think that the Bodhisattva is like that. The Bodhisattva is dispassionate. Yeah, they're in the world. They are moving and acting in the world and sort of doing things, but they're not of it. They're not taken in by it. And the sort of sum of all of this is just letting go. Yeah, cessation. Yeah, then if you can let go to that extent, then, you know, what else is there? What else is there left? What else is there that you need to cling on to? What need is there to be tense or to be uptight or to sort of, you know, be in any way in turbulent mental states of anything of that sort? You can just let go of craving, let go of making everything about you, let go of fabricating the world. And that is awakening, which I have not experienced, by the way, just in case you were wondering. But I just thought it was interesting the way that particular context, that time was spent, it was sort of, yeah, it just wasn't about me, and I wasn't fabricating like crazy, and I felt uninvolved in the complexity of the world. And there was a sort of tendency towards stillness and peacefulness, and it had an exquisite flavour to it. So that, if that's what the Deathless is, then I'll have more of that.